Good afternoon, everyone. Let's talk about freedom today. Good afternoon, everyone. Little sound check here. Let's talk about freedom today. It's a momentous day in history, and we have another momentous day coming shortly after today, which in a couple weeks, we're going to be looking at July 4th, the celebration of freedom. And it's an interesting thing to look at when we talk about freedom and what it means. And I'm going to dive into this. And I'm going to talk about today, June 19th, celebrating Juneteenth, and the Declaration of Independence, which is coming up real soon. Within a couple weeks, we're going to be celebrating freedom. I'm wondering what that's going to look like. How are we going to celebrate freedom? Maybe 6 feet apart. Who knows? But freedom is much deeper than what we see. And there's a quote that I'm going to share with you today, and I love this quote, and I think about it many times throughout the year, and that quote is this: vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. Vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. Now, there's some, I guess, confusion about who said that. We can look into that. I think it's been credited to Thomas Jefferson or one of them, but the truth is they don't really know the origination of the quote based on what I've seen. But vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. What that quote says to me is that freedom is not always there. It's not always promised. We must be vigilant in our quest for freedom. Regardless, freedom doesn't have a skin color. Freedom is freedom. Freedom is something that every single person, it's a quest. It's vigilance. In every moment we seek freedom. We want freedom. But it's not like we get it and it's always there. It's something that we must continually pursue. We must continually pursue it. So on this day, we know that, and this is a crazy story when you stop and think about it. So I really want to shed some light on this because we know that the Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, and January 1st, I believe it was, of 1863. But then we know that it wasn't like freedom just didn't miraculously happen, did it? We know that it took 2 years, because that's why we're celebrating today, is because it took 2 years for the message to get out there. Now, there's lots of beliefs on why it took 2 years, but ultimately it took 2 years for, was it Major General Gordon, to reach Galveston, Texas, and to let them know that they were free and that they must keep they must be paid. The slaves at that time must have been paid if they chose. There was a process. So then you say, why did it take 2 years? Why did it take 2 years? So we'll look at that. But let's look at where it all started was with the Declaration of Independence. What if the Declaration of Independence was never written? What if it was never written? Think about it. It took a long time, but what if we didn't have it? What if it was never written? What if it was written differently? What if the Declaration of Independence had been written differently? Do you see how powerful this is? And I want to share because we're looking at the June 19th, and we know that the Emancipation Proclamation took 2 years to fully take root. Happy Friday, Lisa. Happy Friday. Let's celebrate some freedom today. Let's celebrate freedom when it's that time of year. But here's what I want to share with you, because a lot of people may question it took 2 years for the Emancipation Proclamation to kick in. But if you look at the Declaration of Independence, which was written and ratified on July 4th, 1776. But it wasn't until 1783 where the peace treaty was finally signed and accepted. So what I want to share with you today is that the power of the written word. Because one person may look and say, why did it take so long for freedom? But if we look back, we realize that with the two greatest documents of freedom, the Declaration of Independence and the Emancipation Proclamation, they had to be written. The Declaration, the Proclamation, it had to be solidified. But just as everything in life, it wasn't an immediate process. When the Declaration of Independence was written, when the Emancipation Proclamation was written, it was a written word. It was power in the written word. It was formalized. It was signed. And it was put forth into existence. But then the manifestation of it took time. It took time. It took time for it took until 2 years for the Emancipation Proclamation, and then it took how many years after that to really settle in? And here we are in modern day, and we still have some things happening. And that's why I return to say in every man and every woman that vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. And that it's my responsibility and your responsibility to be free and to pursue freedom consistently. And not in a reckless, I'm going to go do whatever I want kind of a thing, because there's freedom in discipline. There's freedom in having an infrastructure to work within. There's freedom in that. Do you agree with that? Maybe you don't. Let me know if you agree with that. Hey, Susie. Oh, you're watching with Tona and Jenna. Oh, awesome. You're on a Zoom call. Oh, okay. Wonderful. Yeah, I appreciate this. I'm really just wanted to dial into this conversation of freedom today. And by the way, please share what your thoughts are, because I don't want to run away from this topic. I want to hit it head on, because I just believe that freedom is everyone's individual responsibility. And that if we're not free inside, we're never free on the outside. And so freedom must happen within us. But when you're dealing with oppression in any situation, when one person or one people group is oppressing, and I mean, oppression's a strong word, but that's what existed, oppression. The party that's being oppressed can feel less. And so that's why we must do the internal work. Everyone's situation is different, but we must do the work. We must take the individual responsibility to do the work to become free. To become free and to recognize that vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. And when does freedom happen? See, when does freedom happen? Does it happen when Abraham Lincoln writes the Emancipation Proclamation? Or does it happen on June 19th when Major General Gordon reaches Galveston, Texas, and declares in public that slaves are free? There's always two creations. There's the creation inside, and then there's the creation that happens outside. I hope you guys can hear me, because I just want to get this message out there, and I want to share with you one of the greatest stories of freedom that I've ever heard, and there's many, but the one that I always talk about is Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian psychotherapist. He was in a Nazi Germany death camp. Every freedom had been ripped from him. Food, nourishment, family killed. Every freedom you could possibly take away was taken away. They tormented him. They tortured him. They punished him in a Nazi Germany death camp. I can't think of any worse situation than that. And there's many. There's many. I'm just bringing up this one example. And here's what he said. The most powerful proclamation of freedom. They could take away my physical freedoms, but they could never take away my choice about how I would respond to them. And so he chose not to hate them. He chose to be empowered. He chose to proclaim his own individual freedom. He called it the last liberty, that I can choose my response regardless of what they do to me. And he was able to rise above it. And that mindset, and I'm not going to tell the whole story right now, but I tell this in some of the other talks that I do. Through a random series of events that can only be perceived as miracles, this man survived. He lived to tell the story because vigilance is the eternal price of freedom, even in the most extreme, hopeless, devastating situations. Many people perished. He survived. We must pursue our own freedom. And here's what I want to share with you as I wrap this up, bring this to a close. And you can hear me, and if you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. But why don't we make our own proclamation? Why don't we make our own declaration? Why don't we do that? Right? It doesn't mean that we're going to write it down, it's going to miraculously happen, or it may not happen right away. Let me count the years. The Declaration of Independence, written, signed, ratified, 1776. 77, 78, 79, 80, 81, 82, 83. 7 years. 7 years to get away from British rule. And then the words written in that document were not true for every man because there were still slaves. So how long did that process take? But had the document never been written, where would we be today? So I want to compel you to write your personal declaration, your proclamation. It may not happen right away, but where will you be without it? 5 years are going to fly by. 10 years are going to fly by. Where will you be without it? Back in 2014, I wrote my first personal declaration. And it's 2020. I was working for someone else at the time. So 2014, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. It took me 5 years after I wrote this declaration to get free from my corporate job. Because the process was in here. It wasn't outside, it was in here. It was the process of writing a declaration. Now, the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation, certainly that's a collective document that was written for the masses, but it took time. It's going to take time for you. But yes, things don't happen overnight, Susie. Absolutely, that's so true. What if the only thing you needed was patience? There's a great movie, The Shawshank Redemption. And he says, talking about when Andy Dufresne chisels through the wall. And he said, all it took was time and pressure, time and pressure. and I don't want, when I say pressure, let's turn it on its head a little bit. But time and the pressure of your action to move into what you want to be, do, have, give, feel, and or experience in your life. So regardless of the collective, I got a phone call coming in here. Regardless of the collective, it's our individual responsibility to pursue our freedom. Vigilance is the eternal price of freedom. Bob Marley, emancipate yourself from mental slavery, for none but ourselves can free our mind. Think about it. It's a beautiful reflection. So I just want to say, today is a momentous day. It's a day to celebrate freedom. July 4th is coming. We're going to celebrate freedom. It's never a perfect process. It's messy sometimes. But if we take personal responsibility and we write down our declaration of what's important with our life, we can choose to be free in every moment, regardless of what's happening on the outside. So God bless you. Love you. Make today great. And if you want to work, you want to do more, we're working on some things. Maybe we do a personal declaration challenge. Maybe where we do like a challenge where we work together for like a weekend. Everybody draws up their own personal declaration about how they're going to live. Patience is definitely something we are learning in our rush society. Yeah, it is a rush society, isn't it? So let's think about freedom, and let's say it's Father's Day is coming up. Let's think about that. Let's think about freedom and what today means, and let's take the skin color out of it. Let's realize that freedom doesn't have a skin color. That it's everyone's personal quest. It's everyone's personal journey to be free, and I believe we can do it in from a collective standpoint, and we can be free from an individual standpoint. But we must start with the individual, and then we can affect the community and the collective, and just remove ourselves from rise above oppression in any form with any group of people, whether it's individual or collective, and we can be free. It's time to get free. So have a wonderful day. Happy Friday. And I'll talk to you soon. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for joining Susie, Jenna, Tony. Thank you for joining today. Have a great day.